like sausage is the winner this time, duly noted, from knocking mushroom off the championship tier. But we'll see how this goes. It's a good test question to use. So welcome to Integrating Metrics and Patient Experience. I am your host, Dana Littman, and as Todd mentioned, he's monitoring the chat and is also part of the panel. Lisa Lavinia is driving our tech, the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. And if we can go and introduce the rest of our panelists, Lisa, on the next slide. Hopefully you already know us fairly well from attending, but Joan Cardellino and Karina Vargas are also here today. And really, their expertise in the healthcare field is going to be crucial to the background and tools that we are offering, free tools and discussion today. So let's jump right in. I'm going to, as the MC, kind of call on review a few things at the top, call on different panelists at different times, and then again, there's an open discussion section where you can raise your hand, be unmuted, answer in chat, and we'd love to have your actual voices in the discussion when we get to that. We're going to review some of our webinars from October and January that were around social determinants of health, HCAP surveys, aligning data, things like that, and kind of determine the progress. That's part of some of the survey questions we'll have for you as well, kind of see how the surveys were answered back then and how you're answering them now. And the tool I'm talking about is volunteer assignment alignment worksheet. Say that 10 times fast, and Karina's going to run us through that. And that is an easy spreadsheet template download that we offer to you today, and it's a wonderful tool to use. And then again, this main point today is jumping into a discussion of how do we use this in day-to-day issues and to solve problems and to figure things out going forward to integrate the patient experience with the metrics that we want to share. So I'm going to have Joan do a recap of what our past survey results have been, and then I'll call on Todd and then Karina to chime in too.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give one clarification. I know someone's asking in the chat about VSys Anywhere. This tool that we're showing is actually not VSys One or VSys Anywhere related. It's actually outside of that. But our goal is to one day do some kind of integration. So you're good with whatever system you're using. This tool we're going to show is outside of that.
Yeah, it's really Excel-based. It's super simple, and we will get it integrated. So thank you, Kelly, for asking that, and thank you, Karina, for catching that in the chat while I was looking at the main screen. Teamwork makes the dream work. But Joan, if you want to go ahead and go through what our survey results were in October and kind of catch us up.
Good morning, everybody. And for the context of Kelly, who's brand new, I think, to the product, Kelly, this session is strategic. It helps you think through things. And you're really not going to get operational training in this session, but we're going to talk about how you can going forward. So we've been working together on these webinars now for almost a year, I think. And one of the topics that we covered last October was HCAP, helping volunteer professionals in the healthcare setting think through what's the relationship to HCAPs and the scores and the survey process. And this first question was about that, and it was, who is the organization's survey company? Just to see if people actually knew who were on this webinar. Do they know who their survey company is? And I was surprised, really, to see that 36% of our attendees didn't know who their HCAP company was or were sure. So it gave us an idea of how closely tied our clients' thinking is to their impact on volunteers and impact on HCAP scores. And if we could have the next slide. Thank you. We have lots of time to figure out if the attendees, and I would be interested in the chat if you could, help us think this through too. How many of them actually were working with or knew what their department was that managed the overall HCAP process for the organization? And if their volunteer services department had a seat on their hospital's HCAP oversight committee, these are just indicators of how deeply ingrained volunteer services is or is not in the HCAP process for organization, but also generally speaking over the entire sector. And so, again, you can see the answers for yourself. The vast majority of us are not sitting on the HCAPS committee, and there's probably a reason for that. We're a couple of lines down the chain of command. But as you well know, one of the key indicators for a department within an organization is that they're driving your HCAP scores up and they're deeply ingrained in the process. And if almost 74% of our attendees, someone at October's webinar, are not on the committee, that's an indicator of how deeply involved volunteer services is in the HCAP process, really.
Yeah, pull up a chair and give yourself a seat at that table and, ally yourself and then align the metrics that you do want to report out, not just that they're asking for, but again, what we touched upon with integrating patient experience of sometimes a little extra stuff, which will be featured in the Excel tool later on. Go ahead, Jen.
So these questions are meant to help us think through. It's the thinking tool that we're going to talk about today, too. And I was also interested in if our attendees knew what their hospital operating budget looked like, and what their overall star rating was in Medicare. So you can see the answers here. The hospital's budget and whether they're operating in what their operating margin is, whether it's positive or negative, and if so, how much, is an important indicator for any leader of any hospital organization. And I think it's an indicator that our volunteer sector needs to be attuned to, because HCAP means money for your organization and brings income, improves the income for your organization. So any department within a healthcare organization wants to be part of that team that's doing that. It helps us understand our value to the organization, and we want to bring a value to our organization. So we want to know how we're doing financially and how can I help? And one of the things you can do is work on HCAP scores and help drive them up. But also you want to know what your hospital's overall star rating is on Medicare. If you want to know more about these indicators, go back to the October session and we go into them a little bit further. This session is not to cheat sheet, it's just to revisit what we went over in October as a building block for what we're going to go over today. The next slide, please.
And we want to hone those poll everywhere skills. So whether you're texting it in or you've scanned into the site or you've gone on the website in another window, we want to see again, do you interact with the department that's responsible for HCAPs in your hospital? And that means, like Joan mentioned, on a committee, checking in with them, feeding them data. So rather than go through the 10 questions we did in October and use too much of the session to do that, we've kind of combined some of these ideas, again, just to take the general temperature today, anecdotally, of who's in the room and how we can address your experience and get you that seat at the table in the open discussion and go for that. I'm pretty heartened by these answers so far, Joan. That's actually pretty great moving the needle since October.
Yeah. HCAPS is, as you well know, about patient experience. And so today's session is about integrating your metrics now into this HCAPS and patient experience data collection system. So I'm glad to see that you do interact. By the way, these internal systems within hospitals all over the world really are evolving too. So these answers might change in 6 more months because something has moved within your own system and your organization to involve you. And if that has not happened, we hope we'll give you some information to encourage you to reach out and make that happen if you're part of the no answers. So I'm glad to see that many of you interact with your hospital department for HCAPS at this point in time. Now, how you do and what you send them, hopefully we're going to give you a tool to make that even a better experience.
And Lisa's got a kind of a follow-up question if anyone wants to answer in the chat and fill out more detail of which department in your organization handled HCAPS, because that was a more detailed survey question we did in October too, and that was a pretty interesting answer. So if you want to, fill in a little more detail in the chat, again, this is an interactive session, and we can also go to the next poll question and use our poll everywhere technology. And what tools or processes do you currently use to assess how your programs involve patient experience? And that can be a system or a tool that is required in your hospital. It could be paper surveys. Yeah, it could be software, it could be paper surveys, it could be interviews. There's a lot of ways that we can do this. And again, the Excel template tool that we're sharing later on kind of clarifies and makes this process potentially easier if you're not already using a tool. So
another way of maybe saying this would be, how do you assess your value? You know, and what tools or mechanisms are you using that assess the value of your volunteer program, whether or not it's actually feeding into HCAHPS or one of the other standards yet or not? Qualtrics is a good one.
Yeah, Qualtrics is good. And, you know, one of our favorite phrases in doing the topic of metrics and patient experience over the last few months and social determinants of health and HCAHPS is things that aren't counted don't count. So if you want your value known and the value of volunteer services, these are the places to plug those metrics in and get noticed and get that funding in the ways that already exist, including the HCAHPS surveys and others. Todd or Lisa, do you know how widely Qualtrics is used? Is that a pretty common, or even Joan or Karina, is that a pretty common software in the healthcare industry or beyond?
Personally, I'm very familiar with Qualtrics. At least it's been in my world for a long time. I use it myself as a result. So yes, Qualtrics is a survey survey. It does all kinds of surveys. Yeah. So this answer relates to one organization that's adapted it to capturing data about the patient experience. So Qualtrics.
That was my understanding. Yeah, is that it was more of a template survey software and tool, and just, you know, survey whether it's paper surveys or something like Qualtrics or Survey Monkey, and then again, you good old fashioned talk to your volunteers and ask them how it's going, or talk to the patients and ask them how it's going together. So I think again, I'm kind of pleased with how this is shaped up for the answers to getting that variety of analog and, you know, high tech, high touch, and balancing all of that out. And I think we've got another question, and then we're going to jump into talking about the tool, Asking Volunteers. Oh, Asking Volunteers has become the pizza topping favorite for this question. Just good to know.
I really liked artichoke hearts. I'm sorry.
You can take an artichoke heart survey for patient integration anytime you like, Todd. And so now we get to, okay, so how are we, as Karen talked about in previous webinars, how are we sharing or publicizing how the programs are improving patient experience? And that can also fall under data storytelling, which we've talked about. And are you doing that promo yourself in the silo department? Are you aligning with PR and marketing? Great. Newsletter is a great way to get that out. But if you're doing good work and volunteer services is improving the patient experience scores, again, if you don't shout it from the rooftops and get that information in front of the right audiences internally, especially, or externally out to the public, no one's going to know the great work that you're doing and the value of the team in your department. I'm going to think...
I was just going to say, patient experience gets so much money because it's getting so much emphasis right now. So are you interacting in any way with the patient experience team at your location? And if so, how? How are you publicizing the great impact that your volunteers are definitely having on the patient experience? Because the whole point of this webinar and several of the ones we've done previously is, of course, to establish value and publicize it. So that your department gets more funding, we improve the overall experience inside of the hospital, especially surrounding patient care.
Yeah, and Sarah has a good answer, saying in the chat, we use a volunteer impact card to track their activities, patients visited, ways that they help, and comments. I think that's really good and interesting about their experience that day. And that data gets sent to executive leadership team and above. And Sarah, that's a great communication pipeline. So cheers to that, and bravo on having that system in place. And again, we're here not just for the panelist expertise, but the wisdom in the room and to learn from each other in that open discussion. Go ahead, Joe.
I have another observation about this. And I see Mary Matson joined us from California. Mary has a certification of patient experience, and she's also been a director of volunteers for a long time. So she's got the perfect package. So Mary, I'm going to, if you're tuned in, I'm going to count on you for your input here. But the other thing I want to say is one of the questions I had, and it relates to an earlier slide, is the question is, how many of you, we might not have time to answer this, have actually been able to, at least periodically, include a question on your patient experience survey about the impact of volunteers on their experience with the hospital and the hospital services that they receive? That's hard real estate to earn.
Yep.
Because those questions are tightly controlled. But once in a while, an organization and the volunteer department, you're in the queue, and maybe someday your turn comes up, and they will include one question once in a while on that survey. So if anybody has been able to do that, we'd love to hear that in today's session too.
Yeah, in the chat, and also hopefully an open discussion like you've talked about with Mary's example or others that I think have come up before. And so Lisa's just repeated Joan's question. For ease of reference, you don't have to try to memorize what she just said in the chat if you want to get to that. But I want to make sure that we get to Karina and the Excel template tool. So take it away, Karina, and if Lisa can pull up or actually, I think, Karina, you're going to pull up the live interactive tool.
Yeah. Actually, Lisa's going to help me out. She's going to help us navigate. But just a quick thing about the tool, like we mentioned, it is Excel-based. And no, you don't have to be an Excel guru. We did really make it very user-friendly. This is just a reference tool to help you get organized, to help kind of incorporate all the things that we've been mentioning for months and months. And it's just a starting point. It's not like this is it. This is a tool that will cure all things, all aches and pains in your volunteer programs. This is just a starting tool. With that, if there's any feedback you have, when you get to use this tool, we definitely welcome that feedback. We would love to hear from you. So we've made available 2 versions of this template for you. One is a blank template for you to, make your own. And then we also gave you a mock-up, or kind of and you'll see that at the top, Lisa's looking at the mock-up version. But so we have sort of a pre-filled one to give you an idea of how it would be filled out. So I want to first talk about the tabs at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet before we kind of get into the details, and we'll zoom in. But the first thing is the first tab is the assessment. This is where the work will be. This is where we're going to be tying in specific volunteer roles with how they relate to HCAHPS, social determinants of health, key performance indicators, etc. We'll talk about this. We'll come back to this. But what we fill out in this section will generate itself into the next tab of the chart. And so we have a data visualization to help you make some decisions. And again, we will get into this. This is actually an adaptation of, if any of you were a part of the stakeholder management training in February, we actually, we all had a light bulb moment between the VSys Voices team, and we're able to say, hey, we can get this tool and combine it with another tool that the team had been working on. And so we kind of did a nice marriage of that, and it's, I think you'll very much enjoy it. The next tab is, just for information, we gathered some list of volunteer descriptions or roles from a variety of places. That this is just if you're thinking of what other programs are out there, what volunteer programs or roles exist in other organizations. This is just some ideas. This is if you need it, if you want it. You don't have to use this, but it's available to you. And then the very last tab that we have there is something called inputs. To the far left, we see a list of social determinants of health and things like that. And those are things that are going to feed into some drop-down menus. well, you'll see that in the assessment section. Those are just help bar drop-downs. But as Lisa was scrolling over to this other section of, columns E, F, and G, and a couple, I indicated in big red letters, do not touch this section. This is all to help with the design of that chart. Basically, the chart is just an XY axis, and it helps with plot. This is just to make it look pretty. My request is to make it easier for you to use the chart. Don't mess with this section. But if you ever want to come in and add more items to your drop-down menu, you can definitely look at this section too. And one tip that I heard from Dana, which I thought was wonderful, if you happen to mess with this and it doesn't work for you, throw it away. Download open a new copy and just start all over again.
If you accidentally break the free tool, we can give you more free of the tool.
Yeah, free comes also with just an abundant download, and it's fully available. And this will all be available on our VSys Voices. So let's get into the work of it. So in this assessment section, I'm just going to go quickly over all the columns, and then we'll have Lisa zoom in. But so we have an area for you to indicate your volunteer. I know within VSys we use the term volunteer job descriptions. If that makes sense for you, you can rename it to volunteer roles or programs, whatever terminology makes sense for you. We also have, if you scroll into, let's see, Lisa, if you scroll all the way over to the other direction, towards your left, you'll see column B. If you organize your roles within VSys where there is a particular job, or some of you might use departments, some of you might even use this as locations, if you have multiple campuses, if that made sense for you to split it that way. And then if any of you use any of the ID codes or department codes or cost center codes, you're welcome to put that on there. So we did so in our example. So all that's just to kind of label what program we're talking about. So we have a couple examples on here. From here we have columns D and E. Those are related to social determinants of health. So what we're going to be doing is selecting, or we've pre-selected in these examples, what are some of the areas of social determinants of health that this particular role might be associated with. We gave you two options. You don't have to choose both of them, but there is even an option to doesn't apply. In that drop-down menu, that selection list, let's go all the way to the top of that little list, and you'll see not applicable. So all of these columns have a not applicable if you choose not to use this area. But let's suppose in our first example, Angel Flights program, we just said, oh, it's a part of discharge. That's how it's related. And maybe we also gave it another HCAS description there, care transitions. So that's how we've labeled this one. In columns F and G, it also helps us tie into HCAP. I'm sorry, that was the other one. Social determinants of health. So how is this particular volunteer role supporting, if at all, social determinants of health? So we added things like transportation or support systems. Again, you have not applicable as another option, but all those lists that we saw in that input tab are all on here. And so, for those of you who aren't too well-versed in Excel, again, it's pulling from that inputs list. If you are a little bit more savvy, it's what we call data validation, where it's just pulling from a list. And so if that makes sense to you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. We can just move on to the next columns. Columns H and I are where you can indicate if this role is supporting a key performance indicator. And so we presented something here. But you can also say maybe it's targeting a specific organizational goal. That's also another thing you can indicate on here as well. You can literally go into that inputs tab and just rename key performance indicators and rename it as organizational goals there, and then maybe type in goal 1, goal 2, or department goals, if you have something like that too. So again, this is just how now you can write an organizational goal and then again just put it in the assessment. And if you ever need any help, please let us know.
I think it's good to download this example mock-up template and really play around with it because, again, it's not complicated, but it just helps you get that familiarity with what columns you do want to use that are specific and customized to your organization and your work and what you're doing. And then, again, if you don't break that part of the tool, then you can see the data visualization right away on the next tab easily, and you've got the blank one to use and customize as you see fit.
Exactly. And again, there's a little bit of Excel magic. Like I saw that Lisa added like organizational goal, and it didn't quite pop up on the list. Again, that just has to do with something called data validation, which we can maybe if we have time at the very end, I can show you. It's more of an Excel tip, but I can show you how to make sure things are on there. But if you write over any existing cell that we have on there, it will work. You will see the updated one. So suppose I went in through what we're calling indicators, columns D through I are what we call indicators. You've done your assessment of this particular role. Now we have in the columns in the next section here, K, there we go. So now we have some numeric assessments. And so we're saying of those indicators that you just finished sort of categorizing, we ask you to give it a rating, and there's just another drop-down menu there. Give it a rating, 1 through 5. How closely does this role support or align with those indicators? And, this is obviously your own assessment of your program. And so how closely does it align to the indicators? You say, I've really aligned it, we're doing really well, or not so much, and you give it a rating. In columns L, we're asking you to assess how well does it align with the mission of the organization. How well does it support your mission, vision, values, the essence of your organization? So let's suppose you work for a pediatric organization. How well does it meet that mission of the pediatric? Maybe not so much, So just, again, how well does it align to who you are as an organization? In columns M, we are asking you to do a needs assessment. Well, you don't have to go a full needs assessment, but hopefully you've inquired and gotten some feedback from your organization, particularly staff that are maybe managing departments or the volunteers. How do they really even need this role? Have you assessed the need for this position? Because you could think that this is an amazing role, but maybe there's not a big need. And this obviously changes. I know that, for example, books for babies in row 6, you might say, well, early literacy, that's obviously super important. But maybe in this particular time in the pandemic and limited visitors, maybe that's not the highest need at the moment. Maybe the highest need would be in something else. So obviously this is a tool, again, not end all be all. This is a tool that you'll keep finessing and maybe plan out to finesse, your program every quarter, every 6 months, at least every year, running through and kind of reassessing and realigning your program. So those 4 columns that I just talked about, K, L, M, and N, those numeric quantities that you've indicated, we've created just some simple calculations that will automate and update columns O and P. So the indicator alignment and the mission alignment, those 2 numbers simply get added. So if you look at our first Angel Flights program, we gave it a 1 as an indicator for the indicator alignment, a 2 for mission alignment, 1 plus 2 equals 3. So you'll see a 3 in strategic power. That's what we're calling how strong is the strategic power is that. And then column P we're calling buy-in power. You have buy-in from your staff and buy-in from the volunteers, because I forgot to mention column N here, the interest level. How you might say, we have a need, we need volunteers, but then when you turn around and ask your volunteers and you're trying to recruit, you might find that it's actually a tougher role to recruit for. And so you have to put that into consideration as well. So how much interest do you have from your community of volunteers? And so the needs assessment and the interest level, those two numbers are what we call the buy-in power. And like I mentioned earlier in the chart, it's a simple X and Y plot. And so, for example, on here we have a 3 and a 7. You don't need to think about those plots, but I'm just kind of telling you where they're at, 3 and 7 for this Angels flight program. And if we go to the chart, you'll see, and I like that we're zoomed down. We'll zoom in just a second, but you'll see that we have 4 quadrants in this chart. And so the spreadsheet tool will automatically plot that program into a specific place. So if we can go ahead and zoom in that bottom corner quadrant, Lisa, we can see in the bottom right corner that flight programs fell into this quadrant. So what happens when a program falls into this quadrant? We've labeled it low strategic power but high buy-in power. So again, you don't have to figure out, was it a 3, was it a 7, what was it? No, we've just sort of made it easy for you. And so in parentheses, we're saying these are the type of programs you want to go back to the drawing board and try to strategize. Look at, again, key performance indicators, social determinants of health, HCAHPS, or maybe aligning it with your mission, vision, values. There's some work that you need to do with these programs, programs that fall into this category. Suppose it fell to the quadrant to the left of that. So let's just scroll over to the left, Lisa. We have low strategic power, low buy-in power.
No for babies. This is just an example. No nasty letters.
Exactly. Yes. This is just an example. We just put alphabetical order, put some program names, and gave it some numbers. Yes. Let's just say, for example, a program fell into this. Not only is it not strategically strong, but you also don't have a lot of buy-in. These would be your low priority positions, meaning that if you were stretched for time and you really need to get your volunteers in, and you maybe you've been given the green light to bring back volunteers, I probably would suggest, and I think my colleagues would agree with me, probably wouldn't invest a lot of my time into this particular program. I would start with other programs, and you'll see in a moment. There's just more work to be done. I'm not saying ignore it. There is more work to be done. There might even be a need to sunset. That might be the reality. I mean, after you go back into the program, and if you just cannot strategize and make it stronger, or you really can't get the buy-in from the organization staff or the volunteers, maybe it's just a program that is just telling you it needs to be sunset.
The juice may not be worth the squeeze.
Exactly.
Something in that quadrant just may not be worth the squeeze. Yeah.
Exactly. Let's go to the quadrant right above there, Lisa, and it's the high strategic power, low buy-in power, meaning you have a great program, you've really strategized, this is amazing, but either the staff or the volunteers are not interested, and so this is where you really have to work in getting more buy-in. And so it depends on where based on your assessment, where do you need to get more buy-in? Is it from the staff, and maybe you need to look for a champion, someone that can help advocate within the organization that this is a needed program, or maybe you need to do a little better job at the recruitment part of it, and maybe get together with marketing and or a volunteer to help kind of sell the idea, or tell more of these stories of what volunteers are doing to help other people see themselves in that and say, I can do that, to try to get your recruitment. And so these are the ones that you want to get some more buy-in power. All right?
And then the superstars.
And then the superstars. The ones, the golden programs here, the high strategic power and high buy-in. Like, they're already great, they're amazing, they're aligned to so many things that you're doing in the organization, and people want it and people want to do it, and so we obviously had to stick baby cuddlers first, because who doesn't want to hold a little baby, right? I know there are some people who are not baby people, I get it, but for the majority of people, they like holding a small, warm little baby. So these are if you were asked to bring back volunteers, I would start here, honestly. I would
That's
say,
the easiest start. Yeah.
exactly. It's the easiest start, and you don't have to do too much with it. It's almost kind of ready to go. So, but what happens when someone falls right on the line? If you see call light responders at the bottom or community garden at the top there, what if they fall in the middle? It's up to you. This is your chart. You can say, I could probably make it a little stronger in my buy-in and kind of kick it off to the side there and maybe work on strengthening the buy-in power. If you zoom out for just a moment there, Lisa, you'll see some labels on our axis at the bottom of the chart and to the left of the chart. So you'll see level of buy-in at the bottom, and then off on the left it says level of strategic power. So this community garden, it was like in the middle of the buy-in. If you just want to do a little bit more of buy-in, just kick it off to make it a high priority program, or the call light responders. It's not, maybe you just need to strategize just a little, make it a little stronger, and then kind of kick it up into that quadrant as well. But again, this is you. So this is going to take some time. And if you're feeling like, oh my goodness, we have 50 programs, we have so many, going on, start a section at a time, depending on if you want to tackle it department by department, or, you've been given the opportunity to only bring in 5 programs. Run these programs through this assessment and see where it falls in, and see what work you need to do to make them strong, to get that buy-in power, and hopefully this is the precursor for then going into, this is metrics. These are metrics, and I know a lot of people think metrics just what are the volunteers doing? How many cups of coffee? How many patient discharges? Those are metrics as well, but this is another precursor for giving your metrics in a different light. And so connecting those metrics that you are collecting on these particular roles with, again, the social determinants of health, key performance indicators, HCAP. So you really want to solidify the metrics you are collecting on the volunteer impact with the strategic categories that we've given here.
Add this tool to the toolbox of integrating patient experience with the surveys or the volunteer impact card that Sarah was talking about. And I want to make sure we have at least 10 minutes or even 15 for open discussion, and invite those folks to participate. You can raise your hand, ask to be unmuted. You can ask a question in chat as well. And I know, Sarah, I'm really interested in the volunteer impact card. Would you be comfortable unmuting and kind of talking about how that's worked or how that was developed? Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you, Sarah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have been playing this down for a while. I'm like, okay, let's see if I can make this work. So I actually had attended a couple of meetings where people were sharing their annual reports with me, and I was getting ideas, and I think one of them was the Society for Healthcare Volunteer Leadership a few years back. And they had all these amazing pictures of their programs and numbers to go with their programs, and they were telling about how they shared their volunteer impact through these different media. And I was looking at my program going, I know that stuff happens, but I don't track it. And the hardest part for me was that I really didn't have a good way to track it. And my current system didn't really allow me to have the volunteers input the data. And so I actually created these little cards, and they are, they're like a 4x6, and of course the colors on them are very indicative of our volunteer colors. And I tried to make sure that they track something from each one of our programs, but there's a lot of overlap as well. And so it says volunteer impact card across the top, and one of the things that I really like about the impact card is that I started by actually talking to my volunteers. Is this a card that you would actually fill out, right? And some of my veteran volunteers are like, yeah, I wouldn't waste my time with that question, or some of my younger volunteers are like, well, I'd rather spend time dealing with patients than answering as many questions. So I really narrowed it down to 5 questions for them that I thought, again, going back to numbers and things, it's kind of hard, but it gives you kind of an overall image. So how many people did you help at a reception area? And so that kind of question goes towards the greeting areas, registering patients for a service, answering questions or phone calls, helping with directions, and my gift shop purchases. Then my second question is, how many donated items did you give to patients or visitors? So that covers our blankets, our books, magazines, coloring items, activity packets, and so much more. And then about how much time do you spend engaging with the patients? And so a lot of times our volunteers spend a lot of time in the patient rooms or in days visiting with the patients. Sometimes it's comforting time, sometimes it's talking time. I also included my Eucharistic ministers in this question. The My Station, which is like our teaching people how to work their TV, that kind of thing. And each of the ideas about what could be included is actually right underneath the question.
And Sarah,
activities.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sarah. So you're asking them to then to fill these out, and then you collect them and input them somewhere. And are these particular metrics that you're collecting, are they tied into again some of the strategic value of the program? Do you say, for example, volunteers who are helping in this way, or these numbers that we collected, they are supporting this aspect of social determinants of health, or this aspect of the patient experience? Are they tied in that way?
So we actually tied them into our core values. So they're tied into our core values. So the time spent engaging with patients is all about the HCAP, about rounding and responsiveness of staff. And then our fourth question is all about safety. How many items did you check for safety? So safety is one of our core values. And then there's like another generic question about, other ways that you help. My favorite part about this card is actually not the front of the card, which is very numeric. It's actually the back of the card that I find to be the most valuable. And there are only 3 things on the back of my card. The first one is a little section for them to be able to tally their numbers for the front, right? But the next 2 are my favorites, the ones I love to share with my executive leadership team, which is, do you want to share any of your experiences that you had today? And that's where the stories come from. So that's the time when I get the person who did their first shift in the NICU and what that was like. And I actually pulled quotes from these cards during my volunteer celebration this year. And I put them up on a big presentation and had them rotating through in my presentation. And then the third thing on the back of my card is there anything that I need to know, right? Is there some, did you struggle with something? Is there something that you want to share with me that would make your experience better? A lot of times they'll share that there was a new nurse who didn't know what volunteers do, and that tells me, hey, I need to go up and find some time to educate that nurse about what my volunteers do. So that question is really geared towards how do I make that person's experience better, or the department's experience better if they're struggling with something. So, like I said, I personally like the back of my card where they can share openly, and sometimes I don't get very much on the card, and other times I get a lot. But I can go back and I can look at who's consistently using the cards if I alphabetize them, or I use Excel to track all that data. It's really nice for creating graphs and other things with the data, especially in terms of numbers. I can tell which months we typically give out more donations. So I might be able to plan better for, hey, I'd love to accept more donations in the spring because I know more donations are going to go out in the summer.
Yeah, Sarah, and then obviously don't know the specifics of like your visa setup, and this isn't a technology call, but I would say also maybe call into, if you are a current visas user, you can definitely call into support, because a lot of at least the numeric stuff may already be something that you can easily track, and depending on what setup you have, the qualitative stuff like the storytelling may be a little bit different. Again, I'm not knowing your system, but maybe at least taking some of the labor of computing and calculating something, that might be something that can actually be captured by your volunteers. But just a little plug for if you want to call into support. Yeah.
So I feel compelled before the hour gets beyond us to really commend Sarah for the system that she put in place. But where our future lies, and Dana gets all upset about this when I talk about the demise of hospital volunteerism. If hospital volunteerism is going to make it through the automation and the revolution that we're seeing with enterprise resource data, and we talked about this in the past, the key point that needs to happen next for you, Sarah, and systems like that, and this Excel sheet is just the first step, is synchronized data and integrating this data into, electronically integrating this data into your overall organization's data keeping system. So we're not at that point yet as a sector. We're great with narratives. We're great with collecting our own information for our own purposes, but where the survival of our departments and our missions for the future for us is our ability then to synchronize that data, export it electronically, hopefully live, into the overall data collection system that's growing within your organization right now. So I have to say that before we end.
You're right.
Our future.
We had a psychic moment, Joan. I was going to call on you to integrate enterprise resource planning and that kind of larger software and these larger databases, and making sure that part of the integrating the patient experience, and yes, in complimenting Sarah on her just inventing that system and on cardstock. And Lisa has a good point in chat that can't, and to Karina's point, that can be automated to a degree in kiosk and VSys One. And I also want to let people know that this is the kind of strategic approach and more tools in the toolbox and ideas to grow. And Melissa Bergen has the technical webinars that she does twice a month. And when we did this webinar earlier this month, her technical webinar of how to tie this all in technically, physically to how your VSys is set up and the fields that you're using and how it's customized was the next day, and we've got recordings of her webinars. And is anyone off the top of their head, Lisa or Todd, know if Melissa's second webinar is this week or next week?
It was yesterday.
It was yesterday. Okay. Well, we've got the recordings of.
Actually, no, it was rescheduled. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Never mind. I'll let Lisa or Todd answer that. Never mind.
Yeah. So we're looking for champions like Sarah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Who will think this through. I would call what she's done in a manual fashion, the same way we've done with this Excel spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. It's a manual fashion. But there's going to come a time, and it has to come sooner than later, and I'm looking at that within the next year, when we have to find people that will work with their vendors, hopefully VSys, who will experiment then with exporting this Excel information into the enterprise resource planning system. That would be a real crucial step for reinventing healthcare volunteerism. And I get the narrative. It's what we've taken great pride in, and they are still powerful. But data is our future for the next 18 months or so.
Yeah. Go ahead, Karina, and then I want to share resources for folks in the last few minutes. Yeah.
Definitely, if I can second what Joan is saying. So, I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, what we're aiming for as an industry, volunteer management industry, is that your data is already synchronized and already shows up on your enterprise dashboards, right, where they can go and look it up. But while that is not yet happening, at least in a major way, that as an industry we're working to get ourselves ready. Mm-hmm. You know, that we're getting our pieces in place now before that moment comes, because if they come at us and say, hey, we are integrating this dashboard system and pulling information from what can we get from you, and if we're like trying to pick up papers and try to sort of figure it out, we may miss that opportunity. So we have to be ready. Sort of like where I used to work at in the previous hospital, we were always Joint Commission ready, sort of like that, and it's just not like, not taken by surprise, just we're always ready. They can come today, they can come tomorrow, they can come next year. It's, we were always ready in just the same way that we think about our data collection and our metrics in that same way. That we're ready. We're ready to tie into core values. We're ready to tie it into, the impact and the volunteer experience and the patient experience. Like we're ready. That's what we want to aim at.
Yeah, and up on the screen now is just kind of how this aligns, and just another good example. And I want to go in our last 5 minutes or so to our resources page, because we have downloads, we have links. You can download the tool by clicking on this. If you break the tool, it'll be back up to download again. So play with the tool, use the blank one, use the example, and you can also revisit the October and January webinars that we referenced, those original surveys. And again, we wanted to see how far we made progress in the last several months. Ooh, it went blue. That's a beautiful shade of blue. And we're back. And there's some really evergreen resources listed here as well. They're from years past, but they never go out of style. Time-tested truths. Of another tool, visual tool that you can use to plug things in and play with or adapt is from the late great Susan J. Ellis, and that's on the Energized Inc. archive. And then there's an AHVRP from 2012, so the organization doesn't exist anymore, but assessment of the Department of Volunteer Services and Healthcare Institute template spreadsheet. And I really want to thank Joan for the recreating the template spreadsheet from 10 years ago, and that's all up on the VSys Voices resources page. I can talk so well today. So check out these links. The recording of this webinar will be up, and you can come back in and please share seamlessly, steal shamelessly from each other's ideas. Sarah had a great innovation. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that and explaining it. And we are here as a team, as an entire resource of the VSys Voices individually. You can reach out to us, or you can reach out to Lisa or your tech support and say, hey, I really want to follow up. I thought of this question 10 minutes later after it ended. We are reachable pretty much any time. We can answer emails and follow up and clarify things for you if you like. And there's always plenty going on the VSys Voices resources page for not just the webinars that we referenced today, this one as well. And check out the audit template tool and the assessment Department of Volunteer Services and Healthcare Institution template spreadsheet as well. Any final questions in the chat, or anyone want to unmute?
I have one challenge. The title of today's session was, patient experience and metrics. My challenge to everybody on today's call is to go talk to your patient experience folks. That's why we had this question set. You know who they are. Are you partners with them? Are you on their committee? Show them this tool. Show them this static Excel spreadsheet, and show them, your programs and how you've evaluated this section, or how your program brings value to the organization, and HCAP, just on those columns and with it. And ask them for their input. Is there a way that you can today export some of that information just into the enterprise resources initiatives that are happening now? Or how can you work with them further to capture data? That's my challenge to you, to take some action about this. Think it through, play with the Excel spreadsheet, but we need warriors now that will take this forward and experiment with it and improve it and come back. And you're doing a service to the whole sector. We wrote those original audits way back when together. So now's the time for us to bring them to the next level, to bring these audits to incorporate data integration systems, still keep this narrative, still keep the storytelling, but they're not our future. That is our future. So that's my challenge to you. Go back and see if you can make any of this work, and then let your partnership with VSys know.
For those who are watching chat, Sarah was kind enough to email me the template for that card she was talking about.
Ask about that. Fantastic.
And it's up on the Google Drive where you can grab it. Just remember to download it. It's a PDF, and then you can do as you please, I think. Sarah, thank you so much for providing that.
Yeah, and in our last minute, Lisa also had a good point in chat that we're hearing more and more from clients that their data analytics folks are looking for data on volunteers, and Lisa says we've had some clients who have data from VSys just sent over to their data warehouses, probably that enterprise resource planning software, for overall organizational data analysis. So get to know IT, get to know the data analysts in your organization, make friends with those folks, and start those conversations to get this full patient experience. Whatever tools you're using in the toolbox, high-tech, low-tech, high-touch, personal interviews, all of that is useful data that gets fed in, and hopefully with the help of these very highly trained analysts in other staff or perhaps volunteers who you can bring on to a special project if you're not sure if you have a staff member who does that. This is a really growing field, and it's growing in our sector. So thank you to the champions and the advocates like Sarah and others who've talked in the chat today who's doing it. And we're really glad that you've joined us for all of these. A quick final farewell from Karina and Todd and Joan, and then we will sign off, and you'll be able to get all these resources online.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. It's been great.